morning.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Luke 19, 1 through 10.
The story of Zacchaeus.
Yeah, and I think many of us know the background already, but quick refresher, tax collectors, they were hated amongst the Jews. They were considered traitors for siding with the Roman Empire to collect their taxes.
And here we learn about Zacchaeus that his profile was that he was a chief tax collector and was rich, like it says in verse 2. And so wealth would have been his primary identity and his God. And for him, he wouldn't have just risen up in the ranks of being a chief tax collector without bending some rules, without stepping on people, making some aggressive moves, burning some bridges to get there. And on top of that, we find out in verse 3 that he was small in stature. He was short. And that might be a strange detail to include, but I think, as we think about the picture, it means he really had to work hard to prove himself and get to where he was. And so the wealth, the status that the position he had, that was his God, his identity, and he really worked hard to build all of that up. And so for later, when Zacchaeus gives it all up, it's a big deal. Today we're just going to comb through the text, shall we?
Just talk about points that hit us specifically, I think, because I think a lot of us were pretty familiar with it.
Verse 4, something that hit me in a different way was, it says, so he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. So this is Zacchaeus, scrambling to try to get a glimpse of Jesus as Jesus is passing by. And a small point I appreciated this time around was the mention of the sycamore tree and the role it played. Zacchaeus saw his own spiritual poverty. He saw his need for Jesus, and at the right time, he needed help to see Jesus, to be able to see, and he climbed up that sycamore tree. And I thought about how that's actually our role as well. I think we all know stories. We've heard different stories or met people who are spiritually responsive, spiritually hungry, and that they're seeking. And we need to be that sycamore tree in their lives to help them see Jesus. I think perhaps right now, more than ever with COVID and the lostness that everyone is trying to make sense of, all the more we can build up the church and we can be those trees, the sycamore trees for people who want to see Jesus. And I was thinking about how this doesn't mean that we necessarily have to be awesome on our own, because after all, we're trying to point people to Jesus. Jesus himself is awesome. But at the very least, we need to be rooted, we need to be prepared, available, and at the right place and at the right time to point people to Jesus.
One point that hit me was from verse 5, where Jesus sees Zacchaeus. He looks up and says to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. And I was thinking about that word must. When I look at Jesus talking to Zacchaeus, is so interesting. Jesus is not shy at all to invite himself into people's life.
To impose himself.
Yeah, to impose himself. We've already heard from Jesus in Luke 9 where he calls his disciples to follow him. It's going to be self-denial. There's going to be some persecution. There's going to be difficulty. And yet here's Jesus saying, Zacchaeus, I must stay at your house today. Like, you got to get to know me. Like think about it. Jesus is not ashamed of this. And I just thought, oftentimes I think for us, we who know Jesus already, who call ourselves Christian, we can feel ashamed or apologetic about talking about Jesus or even bringing people into introducing Jesus to people. I mean, like this idea of, oh man, like you have a lot of worldly stuff going for you. Jesus could absolutely wreck your life. Like he could make some demands on you. But as Christians, we should be totally okay with that, because we know that at the end of the day, Jesus is better than all of those things. Seeing Jesus coming into someone's life is the single best thing that could happen to someone, even if that means they have to give up something later on. And so I was just really struck by how Jesus just so willingly brings himself into people's life, and how we too, as ministers of Jesus, of Christ, need to be willing to bring Jesus unapologetically to people.
Yeah, and when people accept Jesus, when I was thinking about Zacchaeus, right, he has to give up a lot. But this is not a story of feeling sorry for Zacchaeus, of him giving up his wealth, but it really is a joyful story, a joyful narrative. Verses 6 through 8, it talks about how Zacchaeus, hurried and came down and received Jesus joyfully. And then afterwards, there's something he gives up a lot, right? He says, Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold.
Yeah, so it's really interesting here. If you just think about this, I mean, Jesus didn't ask Zacchaeus to do this. So just note that this is Zacchaeus on his own accord.
On volition, doing this joyfully.
Yeah.
And I think one lesson here for us that I was personally challenged by was clear decisions to follow Jesus should be followed by concrete actions, even if there is a cost. Zacchaeus, after receiving Jesus, doesn't just stop there with his feelings and words, and he's willing to relinquish his previous god of wealth, of money, all of his wealth, to make things right. He does something about the truth that he's internalized after accepting Jesus. And I was thinking right now, this is appropriate timing for all of us, right? Like we just came off a retreat, finished a retreat, and we were convicted by various truths. And I think for all of us, it's one thing to acknowledge with our lips, I should repent, or I agree I need to surrender Lordship lordship over this area, but it's another to actually do something about it. And Zacchaeus is an example of someone who's willing to give it up, to do something about it. And he says, if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore fourfold. He's willing to give all of it up, because if you think about who he hasn't defrauded, he's defrauded everyone, and he's willing to, this means making amends and costly reparations with nearly everyone, which will cost him a lot. But he knows his life has to change if Jesus is really going to be Lord over his life. I'm also struck by the order and components of a genuine decision. It's first received joyfully, and then afterwards there are these concrete actions to surrender lordship. And I think we need to have both, and it has to be in that order. We also can't reverse the order either. It's not just a list about things I need to do before I'm fully saved or for Jesus to tolerate me, nor is it just about receiving things joyfully and not doing anything, feeling the right feelings. And I was reminded again of James 2, where it says faith without works is dead, and that's pretty challenging. It means I have to get up and do something once my mind and my heart know something is right and I need to make that U-turn.
So I think looking here at Zacchaeus is just clear our responsiveness to Jesus. I was just challenged to think about my own relationship with Christ. Like, when you come to know Jesus, really, the old gods go away, and Jesus becomes the only thing that you really care for as much, to that same extent as those old gods. And so I was just thinking, like, are there areas of my own life, are there areas of our own lives that are still not transformed by Jesus, that are still untouched by Jesus? And if so, why is that the case? Because Jesus should touch, the things that were most important to us. And I was just thinking, for myself too, as a Christian, before I became Christian, I valued success and competence. And now after I become a Christian, I still struggle with valuing success and competence. I've just transferred that into the Christian realm. And I guess, I noticed that this is a struggle. It's something I'm working on. And I guess, for us, we have to ask, are there things that are still not touched, those things we valued? And if so, and if they have not been touched, why not? How can that process get started? Because it should be, right? That's what a genuine transformation with Jesus looks like.
So it's not to say we're not saved, but it's just being able to submit to the process of sanctification after we've invited Jesus in.
Yeah. Final quick point is just, I just want to note, as Zacchaeus is transformed by Jesus, it just says he received him joyfully. And, even think about how Zacchaeus makes his claim to make amends for what he did. You just get this picture that Zacchaeus is joyful in what he's doing. And I think that should be a sign of our Christian life, is that it should be marked with joy. And my thought is, if our Christian life is not filled with joy, and even doing some of the works for Jesus, it does not have some component of joy, then there's probably something missing in our understanding of our salvation, right? Something about that hasn't fully touched us yet. And I think that's something to think about, if that's the case. Not like you're not always happy and joyful, but if at the core there's not this deep sense of joy in our salvation, then I think, let's think about that. Why is that the case?
I think for one thing to add is, for I think staff, a lot of times we're really busy with ministry, and ministry can get hard, it can get downright disheartening, it can get disappointing. I think we have to just go back to the joy of our salvation and be able to let that fill us. I was thinking about how the Pharisees or the other people looking around, they're grumbling and they say, oh, that Jesus, he has gone in to be that guest of a man who is a sinner. And for them, it's kind of losing sight of the fact that we're all sinners, and Jesus came despite the odds, despite what we deserved, he came into our lives. And I think the joy of our salvation, we were wretched sinners who received grace. That should be something that can give us a fresh perspective and help us renew that joy when things get hard.
All right, that's all for today.
See you tomorrow.